I had just stepped out of the meeting room when my phone rang. The screen lit up with a familiar name. Mark, my husband. I didn't think much of it, assuming he was calling to ask something casual like, "How did your presentation go?" or "What's for dinner tonight?" But his voice came through, cold enough to freeze me in the hallway. "I'm calling to let you know. I'm divorcing you, Eleanor. And, oh, I've already sold the house." I went numb. On the other end, Mark let out a dry chuckle. "Good luck finding a new place. Tracy and I need the money to start over. She deserves better than that tiny apartment." Tracy. I had suspected for a while that something wasn't right. Mark's unexplained absences, the vague text messages, the way he'd gradually grown distant, like I was a stranger in my own home. But hearing him casually drop her name, as if I had never existed, made my chest tighten like a vice. I gripped the phone tighter, trying to keep my voice steady. "You said you sold the apartment?" "Yes," Mark replied, as nonchalantly as if he had just ordered something online. "The buyer already wired the deposit. I took most of the money. Tracy deserves to live somewhere decent." Every word hit me like a slap. We had lived in that apartment for 8 years, a small but cozy place in the heart of Boston. We'd picked out every light fixture, every paint color. I believed it was the home we built together. But to Mark, it was just another transaction, a product to list and sell. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I took a deep breath and answered curtly, "Thanks for the call, now hang up." I ended the call before he could say another word. "My name is Eleanor Mitchell, 36 years old, creative director at a media company. For almost a decade, I thought I had chosen the right person to build a life with. I used to believe Mark was a man who respected what we had, but in under 2 minutes, he shattered it all." I stood there in the hallway, the fluorescent lights above buzzing like static in my skull. A colleague walked by and asked quietly, "Are you okay?" I nodded, but inside, my thoughts were tangled beyond repair. No, I wasn't okay. But I did know one thing for sure. Mark had just made a massive mistake. I left the office early that day, my mind spinning like I'd been hit by a truck. Mark thought he could sever everything with one phone call. Clean, fast, final. What infuriated me the most, though, was that he honestly believed he could pull it off. He sold the apartment? That was completely impossible. I parked by the curb, staring quietly at the 3-story red brick building nestled in Brookline. The place we once called home, the place where I spent countless weekends dusting shelves, arranging vases and hanging wedding photos. That apartment, it wasn't ours. It was mine. Mine alone. Mark didn't remember, or more accurately, never cared, that I had changed the ownership papers 2 years ago. We were refinancing the mortgage back then to get a lower interest rate. As always, Mark let me handle the paperwork while he just signed. He never read a word. A thick stack of documents, which I had my attorney thoroughly review before Mark put pen to paper. At the time, I didn't do it because I expected betrayal or danger. I just wanted financial security. But now, that decision had become the only shield protecting me from my husband's betrayal. I called Julia, my personal lawyer and close friend from college. We were both in the law society back then, and I knew no one sharper or quicker than her. "Make sure you're somewhere private," I said, as soon as she picked up. My voice hushed. "What happened now?" Julia asked. "I can hear it in your tone. Something's up." I'd told her everything, from Mark's call to his outrageous confession about selling the place. When I mentioned Tracy's name, Julia gasped. "Good grief, is he out of his mind? Doesn't he realize you're the sole owner?" "He never paid attention, never read any documents," I replied, almost with a bitter laugh. "Good, that makes it simple. Selling property without the actual owner's consent is invalid. If the buyer has already wired a deposit, then Mark just landed himself in serious trouble. That's conduct that could qualify as real estate fraud." I sat in silence for a few seconds, letting the words real estate fraud sink in. Not because I wanted to sue Mark right away, but because for the first time in years, I felt like I had the power. "What do you need from me?" Julia asked, her voice now sharp as a blade. "Send a notice to the buyers telling them the transaction is invalid, and draft a formal letter to Mark. Don't hold back," I said firmly. "Consider it done. I'll get on it as fast as I can." When I hung up, a wave of relief swept through my chest, not because it was over, far from it, but because I knew Mark was about to face the truth. He had dug his own hole out of arrogance and carelessness. That night, I stayed at my mother's house to rest for a few days. My mom, a retired school teacher, looked at me once and gently placed her hand on my shoulder. "I never liked that boy from the moment he called you a hassle," she said. "Took me 10 years to realize it," I replied with a bitter smile. Inside me, one door was slowly closing, but another one, stronger and brighter, was opening. Mark thought I was soft, the kind of wife who would collapse under betrayal. He was wrong, and I was going to show him exactly who I was. The next morning, while I was pouring coffee in my mom's little kitchen, Julia called back. She didn't waste time. "I just got off the phone with the buyers. They were stunned, Eleanor. Said they'd never seen a mess like this before." "Are they planning to sue?" I asked, gripping my mug so tightly my knuckles turned white. "Maybe, but luckily, they haven't signed the notarized contract yet. They only sent a partial deposit by wire transfer, so if we handle this properly, we can still contain the damage." I exhaled in relief, but Julia wasn't done. "And I already sent the formal letter to Mark. It clearly states, the sale is invalid, you are the sole legal owner, and if he doesn't return the money, the matter will be referred to authorities." I pictured Mark opening that email, reading each line as the color drained from his face, and I couldn't help but feel a flicker of satisfaction. He always thought he was the smartest one in the room, always believed that a charming smile and some smooth talking could sway me. But this time, there would be no soft landings. Around noon, I received a text from an unfamiliar number. "Hello, Ms. Mitchell. My name is Brandon Lee, legal representative for the couple who placed a deposit on the apartment your husband attempted to sell. Please call me when you have a moment." I called immediately. Brandon answered with a calm, professional tone, though I could hear the fatigue underneath. "We wired over $65,000 in earnest money to Mr. Mark Mitchell, and only now do we realize he didn't have the legal right to sell the property." "That's correct," I said directly. "I'm the sole owner of that apartment. He had no authority to sign anything or accept funds of any kind. We'll be canceling the transaction immediately, but just to be clear, do you plan to press charges against him?" I paused, then answered, "I'm not sure yet, but if he doesn't return the money, I won't hesitate." Brandon sighed. "Understood. We'll deal with him directly to recover the funds, and thank you for confirming everything so quickly, Ms. Mitchell." After the call, I sat alone in my mother's living room, the late autumn sunlight streaming through the window. Something inside me was shifting. The soft, dependent part of me that had clung to Mark for so many years was finally falling away. Later that afternoon, Julia sent me a copy of the letter she'd sent Mark. It was brief, firm, and precise to the last word. Receiving funds and initiating a real estate transaction without legal ownership constitutes a civil violation and may amount to criminal conduct. If Mr. Mark Mitchell does not return the full amount received within 5 business days, we will proceed with filing a lawsuit in court. At that very moment, Mark called. I didn't pick up. Then came 3 more calls, and finally a short text. "Eleanor, do you think we could talk like adults?" I'd stared at the message, almost laughing. When he sold the house behind my back, sneered, and talked about his new lover? Was that what he called acting like an adult? I didn't reply. Instead, I forwarded the message to Julia. Less than 10 minutes later, she called back, her voice laced with authority. "I've already informed him he is no longer allowed to contact you directly. All communication must go through legal channels, and if he keeps bothering you, we can file for a restraining order. I nodded, a sense of relief washing over me. That evening, I had a simple dinner of corn soup and toast with my mom. She placed her hand gently on mine, her eyes kind but steady. "You're stronger than you think, sweetheart. And if needed, I'll be the first one in court to testify that Mark wasn't trustworthy from the very beginning." I burst into laughter, the first real one in days. Maybe I no longer had a husband, but I still had myself, and a solid circle of women standing firmly beside me. And now, the legal battle was only just beginning. I returned to the old apartment on Saturday morning, intending to gather a few personal items, when the door handle twisted suddenly and forcefully, a sound all too familiar. No surprise who was outside. Mark. I took a deep breath and stepped into the hallway. When I opened the door, he stormed in like he still had some right to be there, gripping a stack of papers, probably Julia's emails. "Eleanor, what the hell is going on?" he snapped. "You're trying to cancel the deal? You're getting me sued?" I stood calmly in the living room, the sunlight from the window casting across Mark's flushed face. A face I once believed would keep me safe, now only full of panic and crumbling pride. "I'm not trying to cancel anything, Mark," I said evenly. "I'm protecting what's mine." "What's yours?" Mark laughed loudly, snorting in disbelief. "We bought this apartment together. Don't act like you built it alone." I said nothing, just slowly pulled out a notarized copy of the property deed, carefully prepared by Julia. I laid it flat on the table, placing my finger under the words, "Eleanor Marie Mitchell, sole owner." "You signed this last February, during the mortgage refinancing. I've been the sole legal owner ever since." Mark stepped closer, squinting at the document. He took the copy with slightly trembling hands. "I don't remember any of this. I don't recall you asking what you were signing either. You just signed." Like always. Never read a thing. Never cared. Silence stretched tight between us. Then Mark clutched the paper, his voice rising. "You tricked me." I let out a short, dry laugh. Not from joy, but from how absurd that sounded. "Tricked you? I followed the law. You're the one who tried to sell something you didn't own, then used the money to plan a new dream life with Tracy." Right then, Mark's phone rang. He glanced at the screen, ready to silence it, but I already saw the name flash, Tracy. I looked him straight in the eye. "You lied to her the same way you lied to me. And if she's half as smart as she thinks she is, she's probably starting to realize it now." Mark froze, then suddenly lowered his voice, almost pleading. "Eleanor, can't we handle this another way? I don't want things to go to court. Isn't there a less painful option?" I shook my head. "There's no more we, Mark. The only peaceful option left is for you to quietly walk away from my life." He started pacing back and forth, clearly scrambling for an exit route. He already used part of the deposit to place a down payment on a new house. Tracy thinks this apartment belongs to him. If she finds out, then you can explain it to her yourself. I cut him off. "I'm not some background character in the little play you're putting on." By this point, Mark had lost all composure. He slammed his hand on the table. "You don't have the right to kick me out of here." I stood up straight, each word leaving my mouth like a needle. "I have every legal right to do so, but I don't want to have you physically removed by the police, not yet." I pointed toward the door. "You have two choices. 1, leave today and stop bothering me, or 2, let my lawyer file a restraining order along with a report for unlawful occupancy and financial fraud." Mark stood there, his face pale as a sheet. I turned and walked into the kitchen, opened the fridge and grabbed a bottle of water, trying to steady my hands as adrenaline surged through me. Behind me, Mark said nothing more. Just the sound of heavy footsteps leaving the apartment. I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. Because for the first time in years, I knew I was the one in control of the story. I was sitting at the dining table in the apartment, holding the draft of the divorce papers Julia had sent over, when the doorbell rang. Just a soft ding, but enough to freeze the air in the room. I already knew who would be standing out there. And I was right. Mark. And Tracy. She stood next to him, wrapped in a beige cashmere coat, her face fully made up, eyes darting across the room like she was stepping into her own home. Her arms still looped tightly through Mark's, casually intimate. "Wow," she said, her voice light as she glanced around. "I thought this place would be smaller. Not bad at all." Mark stood slightly behind her, forcing an awkward smile. "Eleanor, I think we can talk. Calmly. This is Tracy. She just wanted to take a quick look at the apartment before—" I rose slowly, pushing my chair back, still holding the folder of documents in my hands. My eyes didn't leave Tracy. "Before what?" I asked gently, as if I were offering someone tea. "Before she moves in?" Tracy chuckled, not yet sensing the storm forming in the room. "We're looking for somewhere more permanent, and Mark said this place was ideal. We'll just tweak the living room a little, switch out the curtains." "You won't be tweaking anything," I interrupted. My voice wasn't loud, but it was sharp enough to make Mark step back. "Because this apartment isn't Mark's. It's not yours. And it's definitely not the dream home for your little fantasy life together." Tracy frowned. "He said the sale went through. The deposit was transferred. I thought everything was already settled." I nodded and walked over to the file cabinet, pulling out a certified copy of the property deed and placing it on the table like a final move in a chess game. "You're welcome to read it thoroughly if you'd like. I'm the sole owner. This document was updated and notarized last year. Mark has no legal right to sell anything. What he did wasn't just invalid, it may be considered criminal fraud." Tracy turned to Mark, her eyes suddenly as cold as ice. "You told me this was the apartment you both bought years ago, that you had full authority over it. So you lied?" Mark stammered. "Tracy, things are more complicated than they seem. I just need a little more time." "No, Mark," I cut in. "It's actually simpler than you think. You tried to sell something that didn't belong to you. You accepted money illegally, and then you brought another woman into your ex-wife's home like you owned the place." Tracy stepped back slightly, clutching her purse tighter. Her expression shifted from confused to visibly angry. "You said the apartment was ready. I quit my job in Chicago. I moved back here because you promised." Mark turned to me, his voice full of blame. "Eleanor, you don't have to blow this out of proportion. You know I'm going through a rough time." I let out a dry laugh. "Your rough time is no longer my problem. You made that clear over the phone, remember? Divorce. Sold the apartment. Good luck finding a new place. Wasn't that what you said, Mark?" Tracy turned to him, this time fully disappointed. "What about the deposit? Did you use it to pay off your debts?" Mark was speechless, his eyes darting. "Oh my God," Tracy whispered. "You didn't just lie to me, you used me." I slowly walked to the front door, opened it, my expression as calm as a host politely asking guests to leave. "Tracy, you can go. And Mark," I turned to him, my gaze unwavering. "I'm asking you to pack your things today. If not, I'll call the police and file for a restraining order." Tracy pulled her hand from Mark's and walked out the door without looking back. Her heels clicked sharply down the hallway. Mark just stood there, as if the world around him had collapsed. No more excuses, no way out. I didn't follow. I didn't need to shout. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't the one left behind. I was the one closing the door. Less than an hour after Tracy left, Mark came back. I was cleaning the bedroom, folding some old blankets my mother had given me into a box, when I heard a knock at the door. This time, there was no urgency or arrogance, just a soft knock, almost hesitant. I opened the door. Mark stood there, looking like he'd just been through a storm. Wrinkled shirt, dark circles under his eyes, and holding a worn-out duffel bag. He didn't say anything, just looked at me with eyes heavy with defeat. "Can I come in and talk?" His voice was raspy. I stepped aside. Not out of pity, but because I knew this was the final moment of an old chapter. Mark placed the bag on the floor and sat down on the sofa like his legs could no longer hold him up. The room was so quiet, I could hear the ticking of the wall clock. "Eleanor," he began. "I'm sorry." I sat across from him, arms crossed. "Sorry for what, Mark?" He swallowed hard. "For betraying you. For selling the apartment behind your back. For letting everything get to this point." I stayed silent, letting him speak. Part of me needed to hear it, not because I still cared, but because I needed to know he understood what he had destroyed. I know I was stupid. I thought I was still young, that I had a chance to start over. Tracy made me feel admired, desired. He paused, realizing those words only pushed him further from me. But it was just a fantasy. When you laid out the documents, it was like a bucket of cold water. I thought I still had control, but it turns out I have nothing. I stood up and pulled from the drawer a thin folder neatly organized in a plastic sleeve. "These are the divorce papers, Mark. Julia has prepared everything, you just need to sign." He didn't reach for them right away. He just stared at the paper, then looked up. His eyes were red. "Do you really want to end it? After 11 years, is there nothing left to hold on to?" I shook my head, not out of anger, but because I had seen his true self, and there was nothing left to regret. "You let go first, Mark. You made the call asking for a divorce. You sold our home behind my back. You brought another woman here like you owned the place. I'm just finishing what you started." He lowered his head. His shoulders trembled slightly. For the first time in years, Mark was no longer the arrogant man who gave orders and looked down on me. He looked more like a lost boy, wounded by his own hand. "If I sign, would you give me more time to move out?" 3 days, I replied. "I think that's more than fair." He nodded, then slowly picked up the pen and signed his name. I stood still and watched, my heart not pounding like I expected, just calm. When he finished signing, I placed the documents into an envelope and said, "I'll send them to Julia. You should start looking for a new place." Mark stood up, picked up his bag, and walked toward the door, but paused without turning around. "Elena, you know what? You're much stronger than I ever imagined. Maybe that's what scared me the most." I said nothing, just quietly closed the door behind him. And this time, no one knocked again. I stood in the apartment, the evening light streaming through the glass windows. It was still the same place, the same old walls I once considered an extension of my heart. But now, they weren't shared memories. They were proof that I had survived the storm. For the first time in years, I felt free. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the bedroom curtains, landing softly on my cheek like it was waking up a part of me that had been dormant for too long. Mark was gone. The apartment felt emptier, eerily quiet. No more blaring EDM on Sunday mornings. No more overpowering cologne flooding the closet. Nothing remained, except me, and a space waiting to be made new. I brewed a cup of mint tea, walked barefoot across the cold wooden floor, glancing at every corner of the apartment like I was surveying an old painting, ready for a fresh canvas. That afternoon, I called Lisa, my best friend since high school, the one who had always said, "Mark isn't even good enough for your kitchen, let alone your heart." She arrived within 30 minutes, bringing a pizza box and 3 rolls of garbage bags. "I'm not asking anything," Lisa said, setting the box on the table. "Just tell me where we start." We began in the living room. The giant recliner Mark had to buy because it was on clearance in New Jersey, gone to the hallway in less than 10 minutes. His liquor cabinet, stocked with unopened bottles of whiskey, was packed up and labeled charity donation. I removed the framed wedding photo hanging in the hallway, a dark, heavy wooden frame that now felt cold. In its place, I hung a canvas painting by my niece, a fall forest scene, bursting with reds and oranges, vivid, needing no reason to exist. Every item we removed lifted a weight from my shoulders. Every cleared space was a reminder. I still have myself, and I will fill this space with something that truly belongs to me. Lisa found a small box hidden in a drawer. Inside were old letters Mark had written me when we first fell in love. She looked up at me. "Want to keep these?" I stared at it for a moment, then quietly dropped it into the trash bag. No. Good memories shouldn't be tied to people who chose to destroy them. We turned on music, cleaned, rearranged books, changed the bed sheets, and finally opened a bottle of white wine. "Cheers," Lisa said, raising her glass. "To your new apartment, and your new version of you." We clinked glasses, the chill of the wine sliding down my throat and spreading warmth to my heart. That night, I sat alone on the new sofa, not the kind Mark would have picked, but a soft, small, olive green couch I waited a whole month to order from a local furniture shop. I turned on a warm lamp, played soft jazz, poured myself a cup of tea, and stared out the large window overlooking Beacon Street. The streetlights cast gentle shadows through the curtains, forming soft streaks of light across the wooden floor. In that moment, there were no interrupting voices, no judging glances, no need to ask permission to be myself. Just me. And quiet freedom, not loud or flashy, but so profound it made my heart tremble with gratitude. I knew there was still a long road ahead. Finalizing the divorce, dealing with financial fallout, healing the wounds inside. But right then and there, I knew. Every step I took now was no longer bound by anyone else. I rearranged my work schedule, signed up for a Wednesday painting class, and began spending weekend mornings writing, something I had put off for years. Mark used to say, "You keep dreaming about writing, but there's no time." Now, I had the time, and the resolve to make that time matter. The apartment is no longer just a place I live in. It's a map of my rebirth. Every detail, from the tiny flower vase on the kitchen shelf to the soft glow of the bedside lamp, is proof of one thing. I've moved through the storm, and I'm moving forward. 2 weeks after Mark left the apartment, I got a call from Julia. Her voice came through the speaker loud and clear as I drove through Cambridge. "Good news, Eleanor. The court signed off on the divorce agreement today. Every term passed without objection." I tightened my grip on the steering wheel for a moment, as if I needed something to hold on to while receiving what I had waited so long for. I was officially no longer the wife of Mark Mitchell. "He didn't ask for anything else?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Not a chance. He showed up late to the hearing, flustered, no lawyer, no proper documents. The court nearly lost patience. When the judge read out the homeowner's name, he fell silent. And when I raised the issue of the illegal down payment, he just hung his head. I let out a dry laugh. I guess he finally understood what consequences feel like. "That's not all," Julia continued. "The court not only finalized the divorce, but also made it clear he has no right to claim any assets because of financial misconduct and deceptive behavior." Mark always believed he could talk his way out of anything, but when it comes to the law and a woman who stood back up after being betrayed, that charm had no power left. That afternoon, I'd bought a bouquet of white tulips and placed them in a glass vase at the center of my dining table. I didn't need anyone to gift them to me anymore. I could do that for myself. In the evening, Lisa dropped by again. She brought waffles and popped a bottle of champagne. The first name on the list of men who were once a problem and are now just the past. I burst out laughing and clinked my glass with hers. And to all the women brave enough to rewrite their lives, with grace and grit. We took a sip, and then Lisa asked, "Do you feel empty? I mean, after everything, endings like this usually leave a void." I thought for a moment and answered, "Strangely, I don't feel empty. I feel light, like I just took off a heavy suit of armor I've been wearing for years." I won't deny that I once loved Mark. I once believed in our shared dream. Once pushed myself to the edge to hold on to the perfect image of a marriage. But in the end, what I realized is, when one person chooses to lie and the other chooses to forgive until there's nothing left, that's no longer a marriage. That's a prison. Late that night, after Lisa left, I received one final message from Mark. The court finalized it. I just wanted to say, "I'm sorry, you don't have to respond." I stared at the message like it was the last door closing behind me. No apology could undo the damage. But I didn't expect it to. I didn't reply. I just pressed delete. I stepped out onto the balcony, into the crisp air of early Boston winter. The city buzzed beneath me, but my mind was quiet. Tomorrow, I would do the first thing as a single woman after 10 years: book a solo trip. I had always wanted to visit the Finger Lakes in New York, where autumn painted the lakeside trails in deep reds and golds, and the morning air was clear as glass. Mark had once scoffed, "That place is boring, nothing to do." Well, I no longer needed anyone to decide for me. My marriage was over, but my journey was just beginning, and this time, I was the one leading the way. I left Boston on Monday morning. The 6:20 train took me to the small town of Canandaigua, a peaceful lakeside place I had always dreamed of, but never dared to visit when I was still Mark's wife. This time, no bulky luggage, just one small suitcase, a few books, a notebook, and me, whole and no one else attached. On the train, I opened my phone and scrolled through an old photo saved in my album years ago. Mark and I, smiling brightly in front of the apartment on the day we moved in. The lighting in the picture was perfect enough for outsiders to believe it was a truly happy moment. But I remembered clearly, that photo was taken just minutes after we argued over something trivial. I wanted to put a bookshelf by the window, and he insisted on mounting the TV there. I gave in, just like I had done hundreds of times throughout our marriage, and with each of those moments, I stepped further away from myself. I turned off the screen, leaned my head against the train window, and let myself remember, not out of regret, but to face what I had truly lived through. I did love Mark. That was real. But love alone doesn't make a healthy relationship. It also needs respect, honesty, and the space to be fully yourself. And those were the things I lacked for many years. That day in Canandaigua, I checked into a small room by the lake, where I could open the door and see the still water and trees rustling in the autumn breeze. I spent the afternoon walking along the shore, aimless and without a clock. No one asked, "When are you coming back?" "Where are you going?" or "Spending money on useless stuff again?" And I realized, freedom doesn't have to be something big. Sometimes it's simply the ability to breathe at your own pace. That night, I sat in the warm wooden room, turned on the desk lamp, and wrote in my notebook. I lost myself in a marriage that only seemed safe. But then, I found my way back. No one rescued me. I rescued myself. I put down the pen and smiled. Not the smile of triumph, but the smile of someone who had walked through a storm and came out whole. The next morning, I woke up early, stepped onto the balcony with a cup of hot coffee, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I had to race anyone or anything. No pressure to earn approval. No need to mold myself into the ideal wife or the reasonable woman. I was me, not perfect, but strong enough to stand alone. On my way back to Boston after 3 days by the lake, I stopped by an old bookstore. A wooden sign hung above the entrance read, "A shop of old stories for those writing new ones." I stepped inside, carrying a feeling that was strange but full of hope. The owner, a woman in her 50s with lightly graying hair, greeted me with a warm smile. "Looking for anything special today?" I replied. "Not really, just starting a new chapter." She nodded, as if she knew exactly what I meant. I left the shop with a slim book, The Woman Who Rewrote Her Life, and as the train pulled into South Station, I knew I was ready. I didn't know exactly what the future would hold, Maybe I'd fall in love again. Maybe I'd live alone for a long time. Maybe I'd change careers, change cities, or simply wake up each morning knowing I'm no longer afraid. But one thing I knew for sure, I was no longer the woman I used to be. I no longer bent over backward to make someone stay. I no longer shrunk my dreams to fit into someone else's shadow. I chose myself, and it was the best choice I've ever made. Eleanor's story is a powerful reminder that no one has the right to strip away your worth or freedom, not even the person you once loved the most. By finding the courage to walk away from a toxic relationship, Eleanor didn't just reclaim her apartment, she reclaimed herself. In real life, sometimes you have to walk through the wreckage to unlock the door to true peace, independence, and happiness. Her journey proves strength doesn't mean you never hurt. It means you rise and keep walking anyway. What do you think of Eleanor's powerful journey? Would you do the same in her shoes? Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to follow the channel for more touching, real-life stories about family and resilience.